These cars were built to handle, and that starts with a real frame, which is very rigid. And this gives the C5 a very stout foundation, which ultimately allows the suspension to actually do its job. By the way, where else can you get a real sports car that has an actual frame? Challengers and Camaros and Mustangs, they all have unibody construction, just like you'd find on a Honda Civic. And if having a full, real, rigid frame wasn't enough, C5s also have a full front and rear, upper and lower aluminum A-arm suspension system. It's also got decently sized anti-sway bars, both front and rear, and the cherry on the top is the rear-mounted transmission, which gives the C5 its near-perfect 50-50 front-to-rear weight balance. And by the way, number 2, did you know that most sports cars that are in the same price range as a used C5 will tend to use struts in the suspension system, and worse yet, a lot of those suspension pieces will be made out of stamped steel. C5s are light compared to the modern cars. And being light means, all things being equal, the car will handle better, stop faster, and accelerate quicker. But wait, newer cars are made with more sophisticated engineering and exotic materials. The C5 is actually lighter than the modern cars. That can't be right, or can it? Let's take a look. The C5 Corvette has a curb weight of about 3,200 pounds. How about a 2015 Ford Mustang? Certainly it's lighter, right? Nope. The Mustangs come in at somewhere between 3,500 pounds and 3,700 pounds, depending on the options. Yikes, time to put that pony on a diet. How about a 2015 Chevrolet Camaro? Certainly GM gave it a little bit of the Corvette engineering to keep the weight down, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case. The Camaro is heavier as well, again coming in at around 3,700 pounds. Maybe it's those two back seats that are adding the extra weight. What about all of those 2015 Dodge Challengers you see out there spinning their tires and running around? Well, I'm not sure where the Dodge engineers stuffed all that extra weight, but they have a lot of horsepower, and they absolutely need it because they break the damn scale coming in at over 4,000 pounds. Acceleration is definitely very much influenced by horsepower and weight. In other words, how many pounds does each horsepower have to lug around with it? Since our base C5 weighs about 3,200 pounds and has 350 horsepower, each horsepower has to lug around about 9.14 pounds wherever it goes. And that's not too bad. The base 2015 Mustang has a 300 horsepower V6 and it weighs 3,700 pounds, so each of the Mustang's horsepower are forced to lug around 12.3 pounds. To be fair, the 2015 Mustang could also have been equipped with a more powerful and expensive 5-liter V8, but then again, the C5 also had a more powerful and expensive engine. It's called the LS6. And so here's the comparison of both of those different engines right up here. And as you can see, once again, the C5 comes out on top. What about the C5's cousin, the Camaro? Well, in 2015, the Camaro had several different engines, but most of you would probably pony up for the LS3 powered Camaro. And once again, the LS6 powered C5 compares quite favorably to the Camaro, and here are the numbers. Finally, let's compare our C5 to the 2015 Challenger, and the Challenger also had many engine options, but since one of them was a 5.7 liter Hemi.
That thing got a Hemi? Yeah. Sweet.
The same displacement as the LS1 and the LS6. Let's compare that version Challenger with our C5. And once again, due to the bloated 4,000 pound weight of the Challenger, it's just not that competitive. GM made around 250,000 fifth generation Corvettes, and a large percentage of these cars are still on the road. Furthermore, the LS engines that came in the C5 were also put into other GM cars as well, and trucks. And since the late 90s, the LS engines have gained such a following, they have been swapped into all kinds of other performance vehicles as well.
LS swapped my RX-8.
Even a few Mustangs.
It's a 2000 Mustang. Thing is really nice. As you can tell, it's a pretty neat car. It is LS swapped.
Because of this, the aftermarket support for our cars is alive and well, and they produce high-performance parts for virtually every system within the C5, and this should help keep our cars up to date with modern tech and on the road for many years to come. I'm talking about parts like cylinder heads and rotating assemblies, manual and automatic transmissions, coilover shocks and sway bars, seats and steering wheels, exhaust systems and headers, tons of rims, and of course body panels from hoods to rear quarters, and really the options are only limited by your taste and the thickness of your checkbook. And here are 3 examples of C5s that are out there right now for sale, starting with an entry-level C5. First, we have a red 1999 coupe with 79,000 miles on it being offered by a Toyota dealership for just under $15,000. Next up is a silver 2002 coupe that only has 40,000 miles on it for just under 19 grand. This one is 3 years newer, which means it incorporates many of the important updates that are detailed in my C5 buyer's guide that make it a bit more desirable of a specimen than the 1999 C5 we just looked at. And finally, the Z06s keep on demanding a premium, especially if they have low miles on it like this one does. And with the Z, you also get a manual transmission and several other improvements aimed at making this the highest performance variant of the 5th generation. Even though these cars are 25 years old, there's always many for sale that are solid and have little, if any, exterior or chassis damage from the elements. Many people who bought their C5 back in the late 90s bought it as their second or perhaps even third car, and some just used it as a weekend toy. And most of them left their daily driver responsibilities to their Toyota Camry or perhaps their minivan. This means that on average, the majority of C5s were left at home in the garage on days where rain was forecast. Over the 20 to 25 year life of the C5, if they've been garaged and out of the rain 98% of the time, this absolutely helps to explain why the majority of these cars are in such excellent condition. It is absolutely evident to me every time I put a C5 up on my lift. The underside typically has little, if any, surface rust, and the steel chassis and aluminum suspension components typically look to be about the same age as the average 6-month-old car. Furthermore, this is still 100% true even if you live in the Rust Belt part of the country. I have lived in the Midwest since the very first C5 Corvette left that first dealership lot in 1997, and I can look you right in the eye and tell you that I have never ever seen a C5 Corvette driving around in Minnesota on the slushy, salty winter roads. I have, however, seen plenty of Camaros, Mustangs, and Challengers drive around covered from salt from top to bottom each and every winter. These numbers are taken from fueleconomy.gov, so they may be a little bit off depending on your driving situation, but the way they rate each vehicle is the same, so they're absolutely useful when making objective comparisons between the vehicles. Hopefully you found the information useful, especially if you're searching for your next sports car. If you did, tap that thumbs up below, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one, and most of all, thanks for watching.